I just have to say, I was fortunate in high school and college to do a lot of studies around the Roosevelts, and I learned more about them as people in 1 hour than I did from all the classes I took in college, just really as human beings, so I want to thank you for that. And we're also, in addition to being fortunate to have this evening tonight and having you here, which is a rare occasion, we're doing a few of these screenings with us. I think we're really fortunate to have a theater like this, Red River, that hosts events like this, that brings the community together so that we can talk and think and learn. It's a really, rare opportunity to have a theater like this. And also public television, and New Hampshire Public Television in specific. We should never take that for granted, that we have public television that would run a 14-hour, 7-part series on some of the most important people in American history. Try getting commercial television to pick that up without commercial interruption. It's going to be tough. And just briefly, one of the things I love personally about documentary film is it takes you into a story, into the lives of people in a way that's so immersive. And as much as I love to read, there's nothing like sitting here and just seeing the visuals, the text, the interviews, the words of people spoken at times by themselves and spoken at times by incredible actors, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And when I think about the work that Ken Burns and his team have done, the breadth of the American story that they have told, it's actually unbelievable. I was here about a year ago watching Central Park 5 with my son Isaiah, and that was a very current story, very topical. And then you go back to the projects on the Civil War, on jazz, on now country music coming up, on baseball, and it's incredible. And I think Ken Burns is the one whose name, of course, is in the forefront. But I hope you know, I certainly know as a filmmaker, there's a team of people that really are on the ground making films like this. And we have 2 producers with us tonight who are key parts of the team that worked on this 14-hour, 7-part series. So what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce these 2 friends, and we're going to just ask a couple of questions of you first to kick it off, but then we really want the audience to take the lead and ask questions. We promise to get you out before 8. We're going to have someone with a mic in the audience. But there's so much to talk about. We want to make good use of our time. So real quickly, we have Dan White, who's the editor and associate producer of the Roosevelts, and he was responsible for the research and acquisition of archival footage. He's currently the post-production coordinator and assistant editor for Ken Burns' upcoming film, The Vietnam War. Thanks for joining us, Dan.
Thank you.
Okay. We also have Pam Tubridy Baucom, and she's one of 3 producers for the Roosevelts. She focused on historical research for the film, and she's been an assistant to Ken Burns, as well as the coordinating producer on a number of Florentine Films productions. Previously, she was a teacher, and she's currently working on a new film on the history of country music. And just as a quick aside, before I open it up, when I was starting to work on my film, including Samuel, like 8 or 9 years ago, I had no idea how to go about a process like this, and I called Florentine Films, and I may have even spoken with them, I'm not sure. And I said, do you guys know any great editors in New England that I could work with? And they spent a lot of time on the phone with me, helped me get some people in mind, and introduced me to the editor that I worked with. So not only is Florentine making incredible work, you're also, I think, cultivating and mentoring a lot of filmmakers throughout the country, and I appreciate that. Thank you. All right, let me just start. The role of a producer, so technically you're an associate producer, you're a producer, that can mean so many things. And we had dinner earlier, and I was amazed at the level of detail and the kind of work that each of you did. It really blew my mind to think of all the small and very large things you do to make a film like this come to fruition. So can you each talk about what it actually meant, what role you had in the film?
Sure. I'll let you. So I was the one of 3 lead producers on the film. The other 2 were Paul Barnes, who was Ken's supervising film editor for over 30 years, and he's produced a few other films and decided that he wanted to do this film on the Roosevelts. And when I heard that Paul was going to do this, I'd been Ken's assistant for 16 and a half years, and I really wanted to do something like this, so I asked if I could help out. And I helped out in a number of different films, but not to the depth that I did on this one. So we started in the fall of 2008, reading and researching the topic, reading as many books as we could. Jeff Ward, who you saw on screen, is the writer of the film. He is also a polio himself. So if you see his reaction when he's talking about Franklin Roosevelt, he's also talking about himself. He's really talking about himself. But he was very moved by Franklin Roosevelt's story, wrote 2 wonderful biographies on him, and really knew the subject, knew Eleanor, knew Theodore Roosevelt's story very well. So Paul and I were really reading for ourselves as much as anything. And in the course of our reading, we're worried, how could Jeff possibly tell the story of Eleanor Roosevelt as deeply and as fully as you're going to have, just by virtue of the fact that you have 2 presidents. And we have to say that he more than did justice in that last scene. I hope brought her to life in a way that was just so wonderful for us. So while Jeff was writing the script, we were reading, and we were also then in the spring of 2009, Paul and Dan and I, three of us, went on the road to do what's called scouting, where you go to your sites that you're going to have to film and see what you need to do, what kind of setups you have to have. And we had 5 Roosevelt homes, the President's home, FDR's home in Hyde Park, Teddy Roosevelt's birthplace in Manhattan, and his family home in Oyster Bay, Campobello, where the FDR and Eleanor had their summer homes, and Warm Springs, Georgia, where, as you saw, the springs were and where FDR died. We also filmed, if you recall, the scene with Eleanor with the bicycle in the home with her grandmother, that haunted, wonderful place in Tubridy, New York, which was one of my favorite places. It's an abandoned home. They were trying to rehab it. Some people lived in it for a brief period of time. It's basically a crumbling vestige of where she lived, and you just feel the ghosts of the people in that building. So that was pretty remarkable. So we went to these places, we scouted, we went back to these places, and we filmed with camera crews, bringing with us sometimes setups. For example, the birthplace had very little in terms of any kind of artifacts, because over the years things had been lifted. So we had to come up with a set of 1840 dinnerware for a seating for 12 in the dining room of this place, and we actually did, and all kinds of set designs in order to you know, if you see in some of the scenes hats and dresses and things, and all these things were pretty much donated to us by local people in the Walpole and vicinity, Fitzwilliam and places like that. So we had a lot of help from local folks to help us save money. We also were out scouting for photographs. Susanna Steisel was our main person in charge of all the photographs, but again, as in everything we do, there's always a team of people, a tiny team, but a team of people. So there'd be 3 or 4 people over to Hyde Park or down in Oyster Bay looking for photographs. Dan spent a lot of time hunting for footage, again with help, but Dan was the main driver in finding all that incredible footage. So we're out doing all of this gathering, doing all the gathering. But somebody has to make a first pass. I mean, they get a wonderful script written by Jeffrey, but there are people that have to put something together that then Ken and the team is going to watch, and those people are the editors. And it's a tremendous job, and I never realized what a job an editor had until, especially when I started working in this building. So we gather all of the ingredients, but they have to make bread. Danny will talk about the bread making. Oh, and can I just tell you, you are a perfect audience. You laughed at every single place. I mean, honest to God, I've never sat in a group of people that was so, it was really gratifying. And we're going to go back and tell. So Red River is a great place to watch a film. Really, thank you. That was
And it's actually, Pam and I were at the back where we kind of like to be able to see the audience's reactions. And I was like, both of us were tearing up at certain points, and I was looking around like, is anyone else tearing up? Or is it just us? So as an associate producer and editor, and Pam was alluding to this, that we all wear a lot of hats at Florentine Films, being such a small company. As associate producer, it was mentioned that I gathered footage. I researched the footage. In the beginning of that process, I would be gathering wide. Get anything related to the Roosevelts, that's easy, find the inaugurations. And then it would get more specific when the script was developing, and I'd be given lists and then editor requests as to certain things that were needed. And of course, it's always a tug of war between archival footage and photographs. And of course, I'm pushing for archival footage for the editor to use, and Susanna Steisel might be pushing for photographs. So over the approximately 5 years of gathering close to 200 hours of footage, 3.5 hours were actually used in the 14-hour film. And out of 25,000 photographs that we gathered over the years, only 2,300, was it 2,300 were used. And Ken's used this analogy, and I'll steal it easily, that it's like making syrup. It takes 40 gallons of sap to get one good gal. So I also edited part of episode 7. Over the years working at Florentine Films, I learned from one of the best, who is Paul Barnes. And Paul Barnes is the holder of the recipe of Florentine Films. You know, he worked with Ken Burns since Civil War. And it seems like that recipe, to simplify it, he developed with Ken over many years. And it is a very elegant way to tell stories written by great authors, great writers, directed by Ken, and then visually reinforced by the editors. And the editors can really help shape. I felt like a novice compared to especially the great Paul Barnes and Eric Ewers and Trisha Reedy, who were other editors on the project. And yeah, I think that's...
Can I just ask you a follow-up to that?
Yeah.
One follow-up question I had was, we were talking earlier about the actual collection of the archival material. I was stunned when you told me about some of the situations you got into in terms of the condition of the footage and how it's being preserved, because this is incredibly important historical footage, right? American history footage. So can you talk just a bit about what you found in actually collecting the footage?
Sure. Well, we went to a lot of different places. You know, one of the biggest resources is the National Archives. The National Archives, all of the contents belong to all of us, and it is free for us to use. Of course, we have to pay to transfer it. And I think that everyone on this project wanted to make Paul and Pam especially proud. You know, we didn't want to let them down. And Jeff, yes. So we all worked as hard as we could for each other and for the story to elevate the quality to match or get close to the level of quality of the writing. So we went to National Archives, Library of Congress. Warm Springs had a few, I think, 8 rolls of film that were home movies, which you saw tonight, which are some of the most touching, you know, pieces. And you can tell they're pretty well-worn pieces of film, home movie footage. And we did our best to get the best transfers, even having some of them transferred over and over. Because, you know, they may have been sitting in an archive, obviously, for how many years? 60 years plus. And it's really fantastic to be able to pull that out, where you can actually see details in people's faces now. And, you know, in the intro, you see FDR's, you can see the glint in his eye, you know, when he's at Mount Rushmore. And, you know, before high definition, you couldn't really see that unless you were actually back in time, you know, seeing that film actually projected before. So film from many different places was in various quality, you know, wrinkled, and just over time we were able to get something good out of it. And it was the same thing with photographs. We went to Warm Springs and scanned glass plate negatives and got some pretty good quality out of that also.
Dan was telling me earlier that he would be thankful if they had a refrigerator at least with some of the film footage. Thank God you did a refrigerator. Or if someone would hand him an original photograph without any gloves on, say, oh, look at this one. Say, don't put that down, and we'll get some gloves and be gentle.
Yeah.
One more question I'll ask, and then we're going to, who has a mic in the audience? Great, you're running, so we know. One last question from me, and just from your heart, I guess I would say, what were the biggest revelations you found for your own selves in doing all this research about the Roosevelts? You know, either one or more of them. You were immersed in this project for 4 and 5 years. Were there certain things that you learned that just really moved you or surprised you about any of the Roosevelts?
One of the most moving moments for me was going to Hyde Park and you saw the footage here, and being in FDR's bedroom when they took his braces out from the museum and brought them over to his bedroom when we filmed them. Buddy Squires is our cinematographer, and again has been with Ken for over 30 years, really since college, and he spent probably 2 hours at least us filming those. And just to think that he wore those all through the Depression, all through World War II, all through incredible pain in his personal life and his family, as well as in his own physical pain and the pain of our country. That was probably the most moving thing for me, I have to say. The other was really going into Tubridy and seeing the place where Eleanor Roosevelt was in fear of her alcoholic uncle to dig into a subject like this and to learn about people. And again, I could write a biography of my husband, and I still would really be telling his story. I mean, you can read 5 biographies, you're going to get 5 different stories. So you just glean what you can from all of them, sort of find a thread that's constant. Look in her autobiography from what family members say. She left a lot out too. So what is biography? What is storytelling? So you just try and be as true to the story as you can and to the people as you can. But last night we were with Anne Roosevelt, who was her granddaughter, who looks uncannily like her grandmother, and she carries the dignity and the thread of that family. And so made me feel like perhaps I was in the presence of Eleanor for at least a little while in there.
Pam mentioning that live footage where we were in the room with the braces, I think that we were kind of all stunned and all a little teary-eyed, and that was one of the toughest shoots, actually, I think. But I think the biggest thing that I learned of this, that I really didn't know before, we all know about Theodore and FDR, didn't particularly know enough about Eleanor, but I think it was the amount of adversity that they overcame. Theodore losing his wife and mother on the same day. Franklin losing his father at a younger age, and the loss of the use of his legs. And then Eleanor losing both parents before the age of 10, and one to alcoholism, and just the amount of pain that they all went through, and what they became from that. Of course, they had amazing support behind them, but it was a really good lesson.
Great. All right, so now it's your turn. Raise your hand, and your name is?
Sean.
Sean's going to find you. So we want to just keep the conversation moving. As soon as you ask a question, we'll get it to the next person who's got a hand up. So who wants to kick it off? Got 2 in the back.
I've always thought one of the most distinctive things about your film, the Ken Burns films, is the music. Can you talk a little bit about where you get it from and whether some of it is original and of course a lot of it is historical?
Thank you, that's a great question. This film was different than lots of the others. I mean, some like jazz were specific to music, like country music will be. With this one, we had no clear idea of the Roosevelts' love for any particular kind of music, but being aristocrats and of a certain economic strata, we didn't think they would have been listening to what we usually have in our films. So Paul Barnes, who was our supervising film editor, again with lots of experience, and he and I both went through and listened to music, as do the editors, but the producers do have to bring some music in. And Paul zeroed in on Aaron Copland, and so a number of the main large pieces in the film are Copland pieces. We also had a young gentleman in his mid-30s, David Sierra, who actually one of our editors was in a hotel in New York and heard him playing down in the lounge. And his kids actually said, "Dad, listen to that guy." Well, Eric went and spoke to him. He's a lovely, lovely gentleman. And David is very, very interested in history as well. So he came up to screenings, would be presented with different scenes that the editors really wanted help with. They couldn't quite find something in our database of over 10,000 pieces of music. They couldn't find anything. So Dave was able to create about 19 pieces of music that are all specific to certain moods in the film. That's actually going to be released as a soundtrack. That's the sound. It won't be all the other music. It's just going to be David's music that will be released. It was sort of a last-minute decision. And then we use traditional music as well, depending on the time period, whether it's the late 1800s, the Jazz Age, or the Second World War, whatever. We do tend to use pieces like that. The piece is the death scene for when Franklin is working on the speech for the UN, and also his death scene. Those were pieces done by a local musician and his wife, Keith Murphy and Becky Tracy from Brattleboro, Vermont. My lovely sister, who really follows music, had turned me on to some of their CDs and brought that music in, and Paul in particular and Dan picked right up on those pieces. So the music comes from lots of different places, but this one is a little bit different than in the past.
I'll just mention briefly, as an editor's standpoint on the use of music, something that we do that is unusual for most editors, we start with music. We start cutting So we'll read a scene, look at a scene, and try to find a piece to cut with. A lot of editors will just slug something in, which is just a different method of a style of editing, but we find it useful to be able to create a tempo and rhythm and
Dan mentioned earlier, some of the editors, you can actually see them
Yeah.
editing while they're tapping to the music and trying to get the rhythm of the film with the rhythm of the music to coincide.
Yes, I wanted to pass on some information to the audience, actually. Today on the Diane Reeves show, Ken Burns was interviewed by Susan Page of USA Today concerning the episodes. And if anyone is preparing to watch Sunday night, I would recommend you go out and find that interview and listen to it. It was an excellent, excellent interview. And also, Ken mentioned in that interview near the end about streaming the episode starting on Monday. And then the CDs will be available on Tuesday. If you could maybe give us a little more information about that for the audience to compare. Thank you.
Great promo.
Yeah, that was good.
He's not a plant. We didn't
we recommend buying the Blu-ray. Well, there's PBS is doing something really interesting this time for Roosevelts. It's called the Double Pump, where they're going to show episode 1 twice on Sunday night, right? And then every single night is going to be a new episode, and I believe they're doing it weekly also, correct?
Yes, yeah.
So you turn on PBS, it's probably going to be on there, unless it's Saturday morning, I don't know. Yes, you can stream on PBS's website, I think the next day.
I think so.
And it'll be on iTunes, it'll be on PBS's like Roku app. So it will be hard not to find it.
Go ahead.
I really want to tell you how much I appreciate tonight and to listen to you up front. What you're doing up front right now is probably as important as watching what we watched tonight. To see the people behind the big little guy, Ken Burns, who's larger than life, and he does a wonderful job. He's an extraordinary inspiration. But to see the people that work with him and work behind him to make the recipe happen is really great. As a Rotarian, I've been a Rotarian for a long time. Our single biggest cause is to eradicate polio. And as a Rotarian, I've kind of lost a little bit of the juice over the number of years being a Rotarian year after year after year. And after seeing the struggle that Franklin Roosevelt went through, and that Eleanor also with world peace is a big thing for Rotarians, to see the inauguration of the United Nations was a very big inspiration to rekindle that spirit to go out and do good things. I also was stationed in Panama, so this was a big thing for me. I'm really very much looking forward to sharing. Thank you for coming tonight. This is great.
You mentioned, you may want to say something different as well, Ken, but you mentioned the big little man, Ken Burns, and I think we should talk briefly about what is exactly his role in this film, because, you know, you said he's traveling around the country, but what does he do versus what do you do?
Yes, thank you. That's really nice of you. That was something we wanted to be sure to say, that these films are made by a team. We had a relatively small team of 11 people. Most of them were editors, so everyone was wearing a number of hats to pull all of this together. But then we always have the wonderful writer, Jeff, and Ken, who is the director. So unfortunately, back in the day, he was able to do everything other than write the script. He went out and did the shooting, he did research, he did all kinds of live shooting as well as photographic shooting, where he did the Ken Burns move with a camera and a metal plate, you know, that he actually magnetized, and he'd stick the pictures on there and the camera would zoom in and out. Over the years, we've gotten really big, and so thankfully, for all of us who have jobs, he's given us the opportunity and had the faith in us to, you know, do a lot of the boots on the ground kind of work, that then he comes into every single screening, and as Dan will tell you about the editing process, when you're in there with him, they work for weeks on something, and then he comes in and says, well, what if we move this and this to here and there? And they're like, why didn't we think of that? I mean, he's brilliant at what he does, but we do have a team of people behind us, and so we have people 43 people work for the company in New York, 2 offices in New York, and then our editing studio and our business office in Walpole. And then once the film is we've decided everything we want in it, it then goes to post-production down in New York, which is when the finishing takes place. And that's hundreds of people, as well as all the folks who help us in the archives. But thank you for bringing up our coworkers, because that's really important.
Anything you want to add to that, Dan? No, good question.
You know Ken Burns is a New Hampshire boy, lives up the road in Walpole, New Hampshire. Where is he tonight?
Twice a year.
Yeah, he could be anywhere. There's a few of him.
Keep showing.
Yeah, we've done this for 3 nights this week. He's been doing this for a month and a half.
Yeah.
Minute hand? Oh, right there.
This may be a really naive question, but it's such a huge topic for Roosevelts. So many biographies written about them. When you get into a project like this, do you go in with an agenda, or is it really a process of discovery? Because there's so many different themes that could flow through these 3 phenomenal, individuals.
Well, I don't know if there's an agenda to begin with. There's a rough outline, and actually a lot of the interviews help direct the direction of the film. And if you watch any of the interviews, they're not really scripted, they're not coerced or directed by Ken. It's really Ken sitting there talking to historians. So they may say something revelatory, and it can change things. And when I think about this film, especially because of all the press and everything going on, I think of something that they say about theatrical movies is, suspend your disbelief. And I think about this film, and any documentary really, is to suspend your preconception when you're going into it. Just because I thought I knew about FDR, I thought I knew about Eleanor and Theodore, but I learned, through these 5 years, I felt like I took a college course and got paid for it.
Yeah, and as Ken always says, in the beginning was the Word. And so really the skeleton and the bones of all of our films is the writing. I mean, we wouldn't have the films we have without the writers we have. Dayton Duncan and Jeff Ward are our main writers, and they are phenomenal. I mean, I just read the first episode that Dayton has written on the country music film, which will be the same. It'll be 14 hours, 7 parts, and I cannot believe, again, the way he has tied in his first draft, all of the disparate elements and people, and to make a narrative that's interesting. And that's the key. It's storytelling. And as Dan will tell you, when they edit, you have to leave some of the babies out the door. I mean, there's beautiful, wonderful stories that you have to get rid of because there are too many notes. So that's what happens. But it's a process. It's a process of honing and watching and moving things and editing and re-editing.
I'll say something quickly about in the editing process. Pam was saying, we screen over and over and over. We have time to hone. We have to hone the film. We have the luxury of this working for Ken. Having 5 years, no documentarian has that amount of time. 6 years, 7 years. We have that great luxury. But I will say, during those moments when we're going over the script and going over the edits, for myself, when my scene is up and Ken is sitting there in his chair with his script in front of him, all I'm doing is watching his #2 Ticonderoga. And if it moves, I know that I have a lot of work to do.
Go ahead.
Yes, I too have read many books on the subject of the Roosevelt, but there's something about seeing the films. And I really want to commend you on this remarkable film, but what I saw of it here tonight, especially the Warm Springs footage, it seems to me, I can't imagine very many people in the world who have seen those until this. And also some of the early Theodore Roosevelt films. It makes a lot of difference. You can read and read and read and read. When you see them walking and moving around, and when you see Franklin Roosevelt at that period of his
the agenda or, every shot you choose to include, every interview you choose to include, you're making a choice about the content that you're presenting to the viewers. And it can lead viewers in different directions. And so we were talking earlier about, I asked the question, because I've been reading up a little bit on Eleanor Roosevelt, and there's a lot of discussion through reputable, sources that she was a lesbian or bisexual. And I said, does that come up at all in the series? I saw an hour of, 14 hours. And so I like the way you describe how you present material like that, where there may not be a conclusive answer. So can you talk about how you present material that might be, a fair way to present it?
That's what I do. That's how you present it.
Yeah, the thing is that, as we know from these descriptions of Franklin Roosevelt, the way Jeff described him, of an era, people didn't talk about things like that. People didn't write about things like that. I mean, if they did, it was very rare. These were aristocratic people who we don't know. There's no written record about Eleanor's, life in any regard other than what she's, chosen to put out there. Her husband had an affair. That's documented. That's acknowledged in 1918, and that's the only one that. The same with him. I mean, there's lots of conjecture, but there is nothing. And we just didn't choose to. It's not like we were trying to sweep it under the rug. Things are certainly, alluded to along the way, and they had very many deep male and female friendships, both of them. These were people who loved to be around other people, particularly Franklin. And as Jeff talks about in one part of the film, someone came into the room and he came back from visiting the president and said, he stood up to greet me. He never stood up on his own. But he had such an incredible personality and life force, and as he was described, as a beautiful head. I mean, the pictures of him, the one picture you see with him profile, just leaning down to this little girl and just smiling. And he just wowed people with his personality. But we really don't know about that part of their lives, really. We can do a lot of them. People do make conjecture. There have been biographies on all aspects of, even the relationship between mother and daughter-in-law. It's, she certainly alluded to her being a dragon lady in her autobiography, but, it's, again, biography, person the best. If you wrote the biography, how accurate would it be? It's tough. So, it's not that we're trying to avoid where some people might think we're not.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of what we do under Ken's direction is present information in a story form using visuals and many other elements, and it's for the audience to draw their own conclusions.
And then, Dan, I just wanted, we're getting a signal that we do need to, but I did want to tell you one thing that was really nice last night. Someone from the audience asked Anne Roosevelt what she learned about her grandparents. And she said, well, I didn't really learn anything new, but we were all in her family were just stunned by the photographs and the footage. There were things that they had never seen. So that was, and hats off to Danny on the footage, and hats off to our crew of people who found photographs.
When we were talking earlier, I said, so did you have a crew of like 10 or 12 researchers? Like, how big was it? It's like, me. That blew me away. You were really doing the vast majority of the research. It's
Still with a lot of help.
It's a huge job. Right, huge job. We have a hand right there. Go ahead.
What was it like working with Ken Burns compared to working with others?
With others. Ken Burns versus working with other people.
This is my first job, other than teaching.
Right. Yeah, that's tough because I started as an intern at Florentine Films, so much experience before that I can't say, but I can really say about Ken, having heard other stories from colleagues working other places, the way that Ken works with his crew, he seems to trust us. With a lot of good training, of course. We have been given the opportunity to learn the secrets of how to make a film under Ken Burns, and then he lets us go with it. And then every once in a while he comes in knowing the script from top to bottom, and even though we look at the script every single day, he seems to have some memory that knows all of it, and
Whips out his Ticonderoga.
yeah.
That's it.
Right, and it's fantastic to be able to work, for somebody who's not like some directors might be right over the editor's shoulder every day, pointing at the screen, this is what I want. And that is a really nice aspect of working at Florentine Films.
I'm going to take the liberty of asking a closing question. I was able to see some other footage on another DVD of the project. So this will also be a teaser for you to want to see the rest of this project. It's, I'm sure, going to be amazing. And just kudos again for an incredible just preview that really got us interested. There's a great interview with George Will that I'm going to read because I want to get it right, where he talks about the presidency being a soft leather glove and how that was when Roosevelt put his hand into it. I think he's speaking of FDR. He expanded that leather glove, and it's a very big glove to fit at this point. And he goes on to say, FDR gave us the idea of the, quote, heroic presidency, and with it, the hope that complex problems would yield to charisma. This sets the country up for perpetual disappointment. So, which I really like, because it kind of brings us to the modern day, too. And no matter what your partisan feelings are, our recent presidents maybe haven't quite filled the expectations that we would hope for them. So, do you think that's true? Do you think that it's almost impossible to fill the shoes of someone like FDR, and that almost every president is doomed to struggle because he's left such a big footprint?
I think that is for the audience to decide. It's interesting. Something that Anne Roosevelt said last night, whether this is answering that question directly or not, she said that something that her ancestor, her family said is that the government is all of us. You know, it is us. And I think I heard Ken on Diane Reed's show saying, I think pretty much the same thing, and that, so if anything happens wrong, we're, involved in that also.
Yeah, I'd also say that they, as Jeffrey Ward said, Franklin Roosevelt would never be president now because of his polio. I mean, the fact that they were able to keep the press at bay, to keep take photographs, take footage away from people. There are 5 photographs that we know of. Again, somebody's got some in their closet, we're sure, but at this point, 5 photographs of him in a wheelchair. Very little footage of him doing his, what they call the walk. And that was due to the fact that, they didn't live in the 24/7 world that we live in now. So people are at a real deficit because of that. I mean, it's a bonus in some ways, but it's a real deficit. So it's really hard to compare. I will say that many times things they said about peace and about the treatment of other human beings 70 years later, he was telling them to do a lot of work. So that's one of the soapbox. You guys have been awesome, though. Seriously, thank you so much.
Great to have you here tonight. I really want to thank you for making time out of your lives to come and be with us. Thanks. Excellent film. Thank you.